Welcome to Showcase of Churches, where I interview pastors who tell me all about their church. We have such a variety of churches in our area, and at the end of the program, we will post a page giving details, service at times, and locations, and there will be time for you to copy this down. So, today my guest is Brad Gentry, who is the pastor of Woodland Park Chapel in Portland, Oregon. So, welcome to Showcase of Churches, Pastor.
Thanks. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, I'm glad to have you. Is Woodland Park Chapel part of a denomination?
We're not part of a denomination like a lot of churches, but we are part of a voluntary association of churches that actually goes back to 1817. It's the oldest missions agency in the United States. It's called American Sunday School Union. It was started back in Philadelphia out of concern for the spiritual welfare of the children of pioneers who were going west.
Well, that's thoughtful. So what can you tell me about this older mission agency?
Well, ASSU would send out these missionaries, but then to do Sunday schools, but not only would they do that, they started publishing Sunday school materials.
Oh, okay.
Since no denominations at that point in the early 1800s they were doing that kind of thing. So the missionaries would go out, they'd set up these Sunday schools for kids, and they even brought pump organs with them in foot lockers. You could put the foot lockers together and would build a pump organ for them on the wagons as they came across. But of course, then after a while, the pioneers, the parents themselves had spiritual needs, and so those Sunday schools would turn into a church.
Good. Wow, pump organs going west in a wagon. What an adventure.
Yeah.
I've never heard of such a thing. That would probably make a good Western movie, don't you think?
It might.
Okay. So once the town churches were established, who were the pastors?
Well, they had several options. Either the missionary, might become the pastor then of the town church, or the church might call a pastor from the populated eastern centers there. And so, anyways, ASSU has changed its name over a couple of times now over the years, and so now it's called In Faith, an American Mission. And it runs all sorts of still youth kinds of things, youth camps, we have VBS, we have all sorts of things like that, but also they now have chaplains that are in the military and chaplains that are in the hospitals.
Okay. And VBS stands for Vacation Bible School.
Vacation
right?
Bible School is what I
Okay,
was trying
good.
to think of, yes.
Yeah. Okay, and that sounds like a great work they were doing. So when was your church built then?
So our church is a little older, 1945, and it was built in the Gateway area of Portland when Gateway/Park Rose was just east Multnomah County, and it was not Portland yet. There was a family, the Mott's family, that they had concern for the lack of the churches that were in that sparsely populated area. So they ended up building 5 different chapels from 1937 through 1955.
Wow. So what were these churches like? Did they have a special emphasis or anything?
Yeah, they were all small churches, say between 30 and 50 people, but the emphasis was really on reaching out to the youth, and so they had lots of big Sunday schools, even if the people were only 30 to 50 in terms of the adults. There would be Vacation Bible School, there would be summer camps, and all of these kinds of things.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to share about the pastors or these churches?
Well, a lot of the churches, even today, the pastors are bivocational, which means that because the churches are small, they can't provide full support, so the pastor works for UPS half-time. In the case of our church, the last of the Mottses, that is Pastor Arnold Motts, he died in 2013. He was 98 years old, and he was still essentially pastoring Woodland Park Chapel.
Wow.
A friend of mine, Mark Helmberger, and I were just finishing up at Western Seminary here in Portland, and we were asked to come into Woodland Park Chapel and pastor for a year or two and see what the Lord would do, since the building needed work and the congregation was down to only maybe 4 or 5 people. So both Mark and I were in our early 50s at the time, and we graduated from Western Seminary in Portland. And like for me, for example, I'm a retired Air Force colonel from my former life.
My, a 98-year-old pastor, and then you're down to 4 or 5 people. So what happens next?
Yeah. Well, I have to say, since 2014, when Mark just passed recently from cancer, by the way, since we came to Woodland Park Chapel, we have had many, many amazing stories of how the Lord led people to help us renovate either the building or the people, of course, have grown as the Lord has provided what we refer to as renewing grace. We did have a youth group early on for the first years, but then most of the youth have now aged out and they become young adults and they're building their own lives in different places around the United States. We even have had a joint youth group with Woodland Park Baptist for a number of years, but that kind of ended around 2021 or so. And so now we're just kind of praying and thinking through what is the next step. The Lord going to bring young families or more youth? And but still, every summer we send up to 20 youth that we connect to them to a Christian summer camp at our expense out near a little town called Wamak in Oregon, Central Oregon. Camp Morrow is the camp.
That's wonderful. I know how kids love camp.
I did.
It's such a great experience. So I want to change the topic a bit now and ask you, do you have any comments on community churches?
Yeah, community churches. You know, if you look at the statistics, the average size church in America today is just a little over 60 people. That means there are many, many more small churches in America than there are large churches or mega churches. Small churches bring a number of advantages. One of them is this sense of community that we have, right? Everybody knows everybody in a small church of 30 to 50 people. So as one person goes through deep waters, everybody knows and they pray and they help out. In our little church over the past just even a couple of years, we've moved widows multiple times. We've facilitated getting reliable cars for some of the older single ladies. Some of the guys lost their jobs as they went into COVID, and we prayed through that, and now they have jobs. And then of course we went through the ups and downs of Pastor Mark's cancer over the past 2 years, and we've learned a lot about how to minister to people who have cancer, and of course their families need help as well. So we have seen the Lord answer so many prayers, and the thing of it is, we feel like the Lord has answered our own prayers, right? Not just the prayer of the person, because we've been praying with them, and so He's answering our prayers at the same time.
Well, I know all this is true because I attended smaller churches, and I know the fellowship is close, you know. And there's also a lot of opportunities to serve.
Oh, there is,
you
exactly.
know, and use your giftings. So do you have any more thoughts on that, using your giftings and your talents in a smaller church?
Yeah, well, you know, often if a person has a talent or gift, it may be difficult to find a place to use that in a large or mega church where there's lots of professionals. You might think of an example of somebody who has a really good voice that likes to sing, right, and would like to help lead worship. But in a big church, you probably have people, maybe that person doesn't read music, but in a large church, you would have people who are super talented musicians. They may maybe even have advanced music degrees, right? So, but in a small church, there's always a need for and a place for people to exercise their God-given talents and their abilities.
Right. Yeah, and I think a small church naturally accommodates this. And I think that's why some of the bigger churches have realized they need to have small home groups and things to do that.
I could see that.
Okay, well, I understand you have some interesting statistics on smaller churches.
Yeah, so another statistic about smaller churches is when you take a look at the number of missionaries that go out from the United States, more come from small churches than come from large churches. Studies show also that the budgets of smaller churches, a higher percentage of those budgets go to overseas missions than do from budgets of large churches, maybe because the large churches have large pastoral paid staffs and or multi-building kinds of campuses they have to support.
Okay, that's interesting. Anything else?
Well, I think it should be obvious. If you come to a small church, you are going to be seen, right?
Okay,
if you visit, you're going to be known. People are going to come out, assuming it's a friendly church, right? And introduce themselves. You may even be invited out afterwards to go to lunch with them, like to Elmer's or to Sherry's. So, yeah. But to enumerate maybe one other item that's an advantage of a small church, because we have limited resources, and I say we because my church is a small church, we have to work together with other like-minded churches in the community and organizations that do ministry. So we're constantly reminded that the kingdom of God does not end at our front door. Right? If you're in a large church or even a mega church who, shall we say, are mostly self-supporting, right? They have everything they need, abundant resources, professionals, and the talents. It can be easy to think that God's kingdom ends at the walls of your church. But, when you're in a small church like mine, well, you know that you rarely lose sight of your daily dependence upon God. All it takes, for example, is one or two families to move away because of a job change or something, and it can really hurt your church.
You bet. So I guess small churches then need to network a little bit more.
Oh, definitely.
Okay. Well, I've noticed that your church is shown as one of them that's been involved in assisting compassion clinics that serve our community. Is that correct?
Yeah, we partner. So here's one area where we partner with other churches in the Park Rose area.
Okay.
Yeah, once a quarter on a Saturday, we put on a clinic together that provides medical and social services for people who are down and out, can't afford the regular thing. But it's under the umbrella of Compassion Connect, a ministry that's around Portland, Oregon.
Right, or even if their insurance doesn't cover certain
Right,
things.
that kind
Like
of
a
thing,
lot
yeah.
of them don't cover dental or
Exactly.
or chiropractic.
Yeah, you don't have to be homeless, you know, to even show up.
Right, exactly. So anything else you want to add to this?
Well, there are great things about big churches. I've been in big churches in my life, right? And there are good things about small churches. Each have their strengths and each have their weaknesses. You know, but most people are already familiar with the pluses of large churches because statistics show that 40% of American regular church goers end up going to large or mega churches. So this morning, we're kind of focusing on the great things about small churches because maybe most people are unaware of the pluses and the strengths and the advantages of these non-denominational or community, or maybe we even call them Bible churches.
Right.
So considering that most churches in America are small, I'm just advocating for understanding their contribution to the welfare of God's people.
Good, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, one other thing I might want to just mention is to challenge young families who would be out there and watching to think about what the Lord might be doing with you and with your family. I mean, you don't have to go to Africa or South America to have an impact for God's kingdom. If you're in a large church and right now you're kind of mostly on receive mode, well, maybe the Lord is calling you to find a small church where you can go, where Jesus Christ is preached, and you can invest 1 year of the life of your family in that church to see what the Lord might do. Maybe by you being there, you will prime the pump. Another young family or two might come in and they'll see that and they'll catch the vision and they'll stay. And then if you end up returning to your mother church at the end of that 1 year, and you know that the Lord then has used you to build and revitalize one of his small churches.
Good. That's good, and I think it's good for people to see that from that perspective. Yeah. Now I want to ask some questions about your church in particular.
Sure.
Okay,
sure.
About how many people come to your service on a Sunday morning?
30 people on a Sunday morning typically.
Okay, so it is small.
Yeah, it's small.
Okay, how about if they're not able to attend, is there a way to see your service online?
Yep, we started that at the beginning of COVID, so we have a live Zoom and with a live mic so people can interact with each other in person and who are on Zoom.
Then would they just go to your website, or how would they connect to that?
If they go to the website, they can connect with us and we will send them the link to that.
And we have that information at the end. Okay, is there a certain way people would want to dress if they visited your church?
Well, of course, this is Portland, so people dress in all sorts of different ways. I've seen people with t-shirts and shorts, particularly in the summer. I usually wear a pullover sweater like this in the winter and just a nice shirt in the summer. Some people have showed up with ties and sport coats, and I usually tease them about outdressing from the pastor. But the ladies are usually wearing slacks. It's a little bit older group that's at Woodland Park Chapel.
Okay.
So yeah.
Well, what time is your service, and about how long does it last?
So it's at 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings. And I say about because Portland time, so depending. It goes about 75 minutes, just a little over an hour, maybe closer to an hour and a half on the second Sunday of the month when we have communion.
Okay. What about Sunday school?
At this time, we do not have Sunday school, but we have a basement that is ready for children and their parents.
Okay.
And so, and there's also a cry room upstairs for nursing mothers and small infants. Yeah.
And how would you describe your worship service?
So we have a distinctive worship service, and it's based on Isaiah chapter 6. And we abbreviate that structure as God, guilt, grace, gratitude. God, Isaiah 6 starts off with Isaiah saying, God, high and lifted up. Then he confesses his unworthiness, his guilt to be in God's presence. God provides grace as he touches the lips of Isaiah and tells him his sins are forgiven. Out of gratitude, Isaiah volunteers for service to the Lord, and then the Lord tells him to go. So God, guilt, grace, gratitude. The point is, this means that the content of our worship service is not just about the gospel being in the message and in the readings and in the songs, but the whole of the worship service is shaped by the gospel. It's an experience of the gospel itself.
Great. The 5 G's. I've never heard of that. Put it that way. It sounds good, like a good thing to keep in mind. Okay, often people feel that they have to be invited to a church to come. So I would like you to personally invite our viewers to your church.
We would love to have you come 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning, meet the people and experience the gospel even in the shaped worship service. Most people are going to come up to you and welcome you. And of course, afterward, they may invite you out to Sherry's or, to Elmer's afterwards. So,
Okay,
yeah.
good. Anything else on your heart you'd like to share?
Well, I would like to encourage the listeners, whoever's watching there, to go to church in person, right? Scripture tells us that a local church body, however big or however small, is the primary place where we are discipled, where we serve and encourage one another, where we grow in our faith. So much of that cannot be done with online church. God is deeply relational. The church is deeply relational. Human beings are deeply relational. Online is not conducive to being deeply relational in God's family. So pick a church, any church that regularly preaches Jesus Christ, and go regularly.
All right. Well, thank you. And thank you for being our guest.
Oh, yeah, it's been my pleasure.
Oh, thank you. Okay, now we're going to post his contact information for Woodland Park Chapel, and we'll leave it up long enough for you to copy the information down. So thank you for coming to Showcase of Churches.